Two names stand above all others in the history of the American Mafia: Al Capone and Lucky Luciano. Both men left an indelible mark on organized crime, but who had the bigger legacy? Who was more popular, more impactful, and more feared? Let's find out. Al Capone, the man who made Chicago the crime capital of America during Prohibition. Born in Brooklyn, New York, Capone made his way to Chicago under the mentorship of Johnny Torrio. By the age of 26, Capone was in control of the Chicago outfit, running bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution rackets that brought in millions. But Capone wasn't just about money. He craved fame. Unlike most mob bosses who stayed in the shadows, Capone embraced the spotlight. He was seen at ball games, smiled for the cameras, and even donated to local charities, earning the nickname, the modern-day Robin Hood. However, behind the scenes, he ruled with brutality, using violence, bribery, and intimidation to eliminate rivals. Capone's legacy is synonymous with the rise of organized crime in America. He transformed the mafia from small, disorganized street gangs into sophisticated, business-like criminal enterprises. Capone's Chicago outfit controlled speakeasies, brothels, gambling rings, and bootlegging operations, generating vast wealth. He also popularized the public enemy image of gangsters, appearing in the media as a flashy, untouchable figure. His wealth, charisma, and public appearances made him a celebrity, even as his criminal empire left a trail of violence, including the infamous St. Valentine's Day Massacre, 1929, where 7 rival gang members were executed in broad daylight. Capone's downfall came not from violence, but from tax evasion. In 1931, he was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in prison, serving time in Alcatraz. His imprisonment symbolized the federal government's growing ability to combat organized crime. However, his influence persisted, as his model of organized crime, combining violence, bribery, and financial acumen, continued to shape the American mafia. Capone's impact is still felt in pop culture, inspiring countless books, movies, and TV shows about gangsters. He remains a symbol of the glamour and brutality of organized crime in the Prohibition era, and his methods influence future generations of mafia bosses. His legacy endures as a cautionary tale of power, greed, and eventual downfall. Capone became a media sensation, embodying the gangster archetype that persists in pop culture today. He was a master of integrating organized crime into the economy, profiting from illicit alcohol sales during Prohibition. Now let's shift to New York, where Charles "Lucky" Luciano was reimagining the mafia's future. Born in Sicily but raised in New York, Luciano saw the flaws in the old-school Mustache Pete way of running the mob. Instead of constant fighting over small turf, Luciano envisioned a national crime syndicate where families worked together. In 1931, Luciano put his plan into motion with one of the boldest moves in mafia history. He had his own boss, Joe "the Boss" Masseria, assassinated. This cleared the path for him to seize control of New York's underworld. One of Luciano's most lasting contributions was the establishment of the Commission in 1931. This governing body brought together the most powerful mafia families in the United States to resolve disputes, divide territories, and set rules to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. By promoting cooperation over violence, Luciano reduced the frequency of gang wars, which had drawn unwanted attention from law enforcement. Before Luciano's rise to power, the mafia was organized around a boss of bosses model, where one leader controlled all families. Luciano abolished this system, instead promoting a structure where families had equal status under the Commission. This decentralized power allowed families to operate independently while still being held accountable to the larger organization. Luciano expanded mafia operations beyond traditional extortion and gambling to include more profitable ventures like narcotics trafficking, labor racketeering, and prostitution. His business-minded approach to crime allowed the mafia to infiltrate legitimate industries, such as construction, trucking, and labor unions. Luciano's life and legacy have been immortalized in books, movies, and TV shows. He's often portrayed as a mastermind of organized crime, inspiring characters like Vito Corleone from The Godfather and Nucky Thompson from Boardwalk Empire. His name has become synonymous with the golden era of the American mafia. Lucky Luciano's legacy is a blend of criminal innovation, strategic vision, and cultural myth. He is remembered as the father of modern organized crime in America, having established a model that outlasted his own lifetime. His impact is still felt today in the way criminal enterprises are organized and portrayed in media. Capone relied on fear and violence. Luciano used strategy, diplomacy, and negotiation. Capone embraced celebrity status. Luciano preferred secrecy. Capone symbolized the gangster image of the Roaring Twenties, while Luciano built a lasting mafia infrastructure that persisted long after his imprisonment. Capone fell due to tax evasion. Luciano was exiled after being convicted of running prostitution rings, but his power endured. Now, who was more popular? Al Capone. He was a celebrity criminal, plastered on every newspaper from coast to coast. He dressed in flashy suits, threw lavish parties, and even had journalists eating out of his hand. People knew his face and his name, even if they feared him. Or Luciano, who, on the other hand, stayed in the shadows. He believed power was most effective when it was unseen. Sure, the FBI and police knew of Luciano, but to the general public, he was just another businessman in a nice suit. So, in terms of popularity, Capone wins this round. Impact is where things get interesting. Capone's reign in Chicago was short-lived, less than 7 years. His power crumbled after the government finally took him down for tax evasion in 1931. But his impact on pop culture is legendary. TV shows, movies, and video games have made Capone the face of the American gangster. Meanwhile, Luciano's impact was more subtle but far more enduring. His creation of the commission is still considered one of the most important events in mafia history. The 5 New York families continued operating for decades under the system he built. Luciano didn't just lead a gang, he revolutionized organized crime. His influence was felt long after he was deported to Italy. So, who had the bigger impact? If you're talking lasting legacy, it's Luciano. He restructured the mafia and made it a national enterprise. Capone was a king for a day, but Luciano built a dynasty. Who was more feared? This one is tricky. Capone was known for his over-the-top violence. When people heard the name Capone, they knew someone was getting whacked. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre is still one of the most infamous mob hits in history. He wanted people to know he was the king of Chicago. And he didn't care how many bodies it took to prove it. But Luciano was feared for a different reason. Strategy. He didn't need to kill you himself. He could make one phone call and you'd disappear. While Capone ruled with brute force, Luciano ruled with calculated power. He had alliances, informants, and layers of protection. So who's more feared? It depends on who you ask. Capone was feared by the streets. Luciano was feared by everyone. Alright, so let's break it down. Popularity? Capone. His name still rings bells today. Impact? Luciano. He changed the mafia forever. Fear? Tough call. But we're giving the edge to Luciano for his ability to stay untouchable. Both men were titans of organized crime, but if we're talking legacy, it's gotta be Lucky Luciano. His blueprint for the mafia became the gold standard, and his influence is still seen in mafia lore today. Capone was the star that burned brightly, but Luciano was the mastermind behind the curtain. Who do you think was more legendary? Drop a comment below and let us know. Want more deep dives on the world's most infamous criminals? Hit that subscribe button like this video and stay tuned for more.